Today, I want to talk about what I believe is the pool of death heading into CWL London. Now, I think there can be arguments that can be made for other groups, but I want to first cover what the definition of the pool of death is, because many people kind of get this confused. It isn't which pool has the most talent, rather, which pool is the most competitive. Now, talent is a factor, right? It's going to be a factor in terms of your selection process for what your pool of death is, but it shouldn't be the first one. Pool of death indicates that everyone has the ability to die. Everyone has the ability to fall in that particular group, which is the reason why my simple choice for the group of death is Pool B. Now, for many, this isn't going to be a surprise, right? There are a lot of people out there who have expressed their opinions. Many people I've saw have been choosing B kind of more as the front runner, but there have been a few people out there who have selected pools like A or Pool C. If you're Pool D, you're crazy. But I want to cover Pool A. This one, it's not too difficult to showcase why it isn't the pool of death. Now, in this group, we're going to have 100T, Optic Gaming, Enigma 6, and Reciprocity. Immediately out of the gate, as you just look at the names, the teams on the page, you can see seed number 3 stands out. E6 are the least likely number 3 seed in the entirety of the 4 groups that had the less amount of chance to make it in the top 2, which is one thing that already, for me, takes them out of contention. That's the one thing that already, that's how close these groups are in terms of the ones that exist just above them. That's how close this is. That one team, despite how talented they may or may not be, their chance in this group is the least likely of every other 3 seed that is going to be in this tournament, which to me is already kind of what solidifies them. But let's go ahead and talk about this group just a little bit more. A team that I'm very interested to see that's also going to be in this group is Team Reciprocity. This is one that I think kind of throws the wrench into the setup in terms of whether or not this is or whether or not this is for a lot of people. I'm excited to see these boys play. I think they will have the crowd in their side in terms of this event, which I think is huge considering this will be an EU event. Everyone remembers last year how crazy the crowd was, the momentum that they were giving quite a few of the European players out there. And obviously, they just have a stellar 3rd place finish at CWL Fort Worth, which was not expected by many people after the roster changes, after everything went down. No one really thought that they were going to be up to that particular level. But Fort Worth was in March. Let's take a look at what happened for them in April. Pro League, right? Just a few days, few weeks after their Fort Worth, top placement, they lost a 3-0 series to 100T. They went Game 5 with E6, and then they got 3-1'd by Splice. So then you had them versus Optic to make it into the 2nd spot, because I'm personally going with 100T. I think that's a pretty easy one to say. The way that they closed out Fort Worth was nothing that's really in their control. That's my personal prediction. I think it's going to be Optic versus Reciprocity. I think that's pretty much the closeout for this one. I was not really impressed with OG at Fort Worth. I was not impressed with them during their run in the Pro League. They go to 3 Game 5s versus E6, Denial, and Splice, and they lose 3-0 to 100T, which was very frequent. So you talk about 100T has dominated both rosters that exist just below them. OG versus Rec, take your pick. My personal prediction's kind of still up in the air, but I think that's where that pool kind of comes into a close, and that's where the discussion ends in terms of, is this pool the pool of death? Let's move on. Pool C, E-United, FaZe Clan, Team Envy, and Evil Geniuses. Now, I believe that this is the closest group in contention with my personal pick of Pool D. The main reason why I think that is because of how many questions that exist from this pool. Well, questions, what do you mean by that? Well, the reason why I'm asking these questions is because that pretty much of the factor that we have 3 teams that all made a roster change within the roster change period, all 4 of them making a roster change in general recently. So let's quickly recap these teams to let everyone kind of get an idea in terms of what is to be expected, what these rosters are now looking like now heading into London. First team, Evil Geniuses. We have Exotic and Attach who stay. They snag Apathy, who was pretty much on the runaround from Envy. He pretty much gets replaced in the starting lineup. We get JCap, who was replaced by Simp on E United, and they get Phantoms from FC Black. Immediate concern, not enough slaying power. This roster will contend based off how well they work together. There's been a lot of talk about how JCap and Apathy are going to perform when it comes in champs, because that's when they absolutely do perform. My big thing is when I talk about JCap being the assist man, he needs shooters. He needs players who he can pass to. He doesn't need people who are going to pass back to him. That's not how this team is going to function, and that's my biggest worry about this roster is they're going to be great, I think, in terms of chemistry. You got a lot of world champions. They add up to quite a bit. It's very, very impressive, but in terms of whenever they are on point, whenever they're playing at some of the best teams in the world, I don't see them contending based off slang. Your setups can be nice, but they can be easily broken by a team who's a lot more talented in terms of slang in comparison to you. Next roster we have is going to be Team Envy. We've got Hook, Aches, and Silly. They all stay. Decimate comes from G2. Pharaoh ends up coming from the bench of 100T and Apathy. And obviously we talk about Assault, kind of are on the back end of things. Now, my concern with this roster is in regards to teamwork. After all the rumors of Aches being dropped off the team, I'm worried about this group of players listening to instruction, getting too comfortable with each other. I'm also curious in terms of the slang, how that's all going to generate. Decimate, obviously, fantastic player throughout the year. However, when he's combined with Hook, how's that going to work out? How's Pharaoh going to come to this team? Obviously, after a difficult role situation on 100T, it's going to be a little bit easier for him in terms of most things. But I will say one thing that makes me feel a lot more comfortable in terms of the arguments, in terms of how the leadership is going to go, is Coach Bevels. The coach has teamed with both Pharaoh and Decimate back last year in World War II. They have a ton of knowledge when it comes into Search and Destroy, and I think that's one thing that's really going to help Team Envy a lot, because I feel like Envy was one of the teams that during Roster Mania pretty much went based off a blueprint. They made changes based off the way that they work, based off the team that they are. They realize they're not the best slang team out there. They don't have the names that maybe Hunter T, OG have, but they're willing to work with, or even LG, but they're willing to work with what they've got. Next on the list, we've got FaZe Clan. FaZe managed to get into the league by purchasing Red Reserve's league spot. Zuma, Asim, Celium join alongside Zero and Scraps to complete this team. Now, I went out and stated that this was one of my favorite roster change, because it is, and the reason why I decided to make that claim was because I feel like this team was solid in every role. There was a lot of rosters who I looked at, and I've said, well, how are they going to perform when it comes into the SMGs? The Maddoxes aren't as strong as I think. Maybe the chemistry isn't there. However, my worry with this team comes from chemistry. It comes from a lack of practice, because none of these guys have played with each other before. You talk about, the ability of Zero and Scraps to come with a group of players that they're not really too familiar with. Zuma, Celium, and Asim haven't really been playing with each other for that long either. And when I interviewed Zuma, he stated himself heading into London, he's confident, but he wants to be realistic because he knows that this team has a new spirit. They themselves, as a roster, know that they're new. And I also want to see more of Asim. I want to see him and Zuma back-to-back in terms of how they're going to perform versus some of the best SOGs in the world. That duo versus Envy is going to be very, very interesting to watch. And also, I'm curious to see Zero back in his old role. Everyone's talking about, oh my gosh, Zero won MVP. He was a super solid player when he was a Mid AR in his past. Okay, I get it. It's a different game. We all talk about how difficult it is to kind of translate things, so I get Zero's kind of point of view. However, I want to see him in the role before we start claiming that he's back to his Zero of old, his dominant run that he had, a few titles prior. I want to start to see this group play a little bit more before I start making claims that, yeah, they're filled in every role without question. Based on paper, they look like it, but how in actuality is it going to perform, considering this is a new team? They're in that honeymoon stage. Everything's working out. Everything's nice. When you play against some better teams, that can start to change a little bit. And lastly, in this group, we've got E United. This team played the roster change period perfectly. You know why? Because they didn't make a change. They didn't make a change in the roster change period. What they did was that they added a player before the roster change period to allow for themselves to have some time to work with each other. They pretty much removed JCat from the starting lineup. They add Simp, who was pretty much coming from their cadet team, and it allowed for them to have a little bit of practice. And this, to me, is the team that ruins this group's chance of being the group of death. Because E United have a history off of taking down new teams. If you want to, go back to the last, or rather the first series that E United played on LAN in World War II. Look at, especially last year and then heading into this year, look at the way that they dominated those particular rosters. If you go back and watch, and I remember this, E United versus EG to kick off the very first event of World War II, watch how they dominated them. They are willing to take down rosters that don't have confidence in their setups. When they face off against new teams, when they face off against groups who don't know 100% what they're doing, their lineups, their setups aren't the best, the decision-making is still kind of up in the air, roles are new, E United is there to take advantage of that. And that's one thing that I think really kind of ruins this roster's, or rather this pool's chance of being the pool of death, is because E United, I think, at times are going to feast on a lot of these new groups, especially when it comes to Search and Destroy, when it comes to breaking certain, major hardpoint hills, in terms of money hills, and hardpoint and certain control spots, etc. They're going to destroy teams that aren't confident in those setups. And one thing that I like about E United as well was that they came through and they made a change because they knew who they were as well. They add in Simp. They need a little bit of help when it comes into slaying. That was the number one thing that they needed. They add that into their lineup now. They have Simp, who's a lot more confident of a slayer in terms of what this team needed. I think that helps them overall. And I think honestly, E United is going to be a shoo-in to make it out of here. I'd be shocked if they don't make it. And depending on how well equipped FaZe is, I think it's going to be whether or not they get past Envy, which is the big thing right now. So I'm siding with Envy as of this moment, and I don't have the utmost faith in Evil Geniuses to also try to contend them. So I'm thinking E United, I'm thinking Envy. I think that's going to be a battle between FaZe and Envy to get out of there, and that's the way that the group falls for me. Now, lastly, let's talk about Pool B. Why did I choose this team to be my pool of death? Competition-wise, I look at this group, and I think that every roster legitimately has a chance to make it out. I really do. Denial, off of roster change, that I think has the ability to be a good one. They're going to have the crowd on their side, which is crucial. I talked about how that was a massive kind of component for reciprocity. They're going to have that now. They had 2 superstar Maddox players, and Brack and Alex, which is, pretty much what the old Red Reserve needed, was that they needed someone to coincide with Scraps. They needed that extra piece. So the fact that you have 2 guys who are confident in their Maddox roles, I think is really going to help them out a lot. Next, we have Luminosity, who are the defending champions from Fort Worth. Now, granted, they look the greatest in the Pro League, not necessarily, but they're a team who performs way better in these major LAN tournaments. It's been a roster that I've been kind of having my eye on for a lot of this year. My questions came, in terms of their consistency, how they were going to play in regards to LAN versus kind of more of the Pro League atmosphere. Clearly, they dominate when it comes down to those open major events, as they are the defending champions. And if Gunless is on form the way that he was, if we start to see the team kind of as a unit start to perform a little bit better, I think they have a great chance at moving on in this group and seeing more success. Next, Splice, who are the most consistent team on LAN so far, deserve to be treated like it. 3rd at CWL Vegas, 2nd at CWL Fort Worth. So a guaranteed top 3 team in the world right now. I still do have a few questions surrounding them, but they're a really talented team, and there's nothing that you can take away from that. And then you have gen.g, who placed top 8 at CWL Fort Worth, however lost at Game 5 versus Luminosity, who happens to be in their group, and later lost another Game 5 versus Reciprocity, which could have given them a way better placement. So they hold the best record of the entire Pro League and look like, depending on the day, that they could actually be in that discussion of a real contender versus some of the best teams in the world. So much differently than LG and Splice, this team performs way better at Pro League, while LG and Splice usually perform a lot better in terms of regular events. So that's my biggest thing right now. So in this pool, 4 great teams, one of them being a new roster with the crowd on their side. Add 2 superstar Maddox players in additions like Brack and Alex. You have the defending champions from the previous event, and on paper, still one of the best rosters in the entire world. You have the most consistent team in the CWL right now in Splice, with a 3rd and a 2nd place finish so far this year. And in terms of the Pro League, you have the best team in the game in terms of Pro League, of which they got knocked out last tournament by losing 2 Game 5s, one of which happens to be in their group. So one of the best teams in Pro League, 2 of the best teams in the world, one of them being a defending champion, the most consistent team so far, and a roster who looks fantastic off a roster change. I think that this team is the pool of death, and I feel like it isn't really that hard to call. I think this is probably one of the most difficult groups to call in Call of Duty history, and I think it's probably one of the most difficult ones to get out of in Call of Duty Esports history as well.